This conversation that was sparked by that extraordinary briefing by the police commissioner in KwaZulu-Natal, Mkhwanazi. Still have SABC News political editor Mkhwanazis, but in a short while I'll also bring in Professor Beim as well as Chad Thomas of IRS Forensic Investigations. Mzwai, let me just quickly touch with you on the issue of timing. Everyone, almost all the voices we've heard from this morning, the political voices, are saying that we need to hear from the president as soon as possible. This is an issue that has implications for national security, the stability within police, law enforcement and the likes. The timing, though, it's a week. We are in mourning, as we just said now, with the passing on of the former deputy president, but also the president is out of the country.
Well, there does appear to be quite a lot at play here. So clearly, if there are certain things that are happening in the background that you and I may not necessarily be privy to, so you'll not necessarily be alive to the fact that you have to time certain things. So once you feel for you at that particular moment, it's time you speak, you'll certainly go out and speak regardless of what else is happening.
Also, so, depending what other processes are playing themselves out in the background that may not necessarily be reflected in the official statement.
Absolutely, that's exactly. In fact, that's what I was saying. I mean, if you listened to Mkhwanazi, talking about the arrest of Khumalo, you sometimes, I mean, you can't not think, is there something coming on your way? Of course, we don't know. But clearly, as we have said, the reason why people are saying we need to hear from the president, we need to hear from the minister, because we need to understand why would a provincial commissioner go as far as to say these explosive
a commissioner
statements.
Who's actually quite popular, who's riding the tide of popularity at the moment.
Exactly.
Stake it all.
Yes.
What's really going on in
What's really going on? And remember, he did not even confine himself to only the province. He also went as far as to indicate what is happening at national, what is happening even in Gauteng. So how have we been working together? So what is it that is forcing him? So that is why we are saying the leadership of the police. In fact, I would also want to hear from the National Commissioner himself. What is it? Because he says he has passed these things on to you. So have you passed them on to the minister and the president?
All right, let's bring in Professor Beim just for some analysis of this. And of course, we'll bring in Chad Thomas in a moment. Prof. Mkhwanazi, good afternoon. What an extraordinary turn of events that we've had in the last 2.5 hours or so. What is the upshot for you from what we heard from the Provincial Commissioner Mkhwanazi and its political implications?
Good afternoon, Prof. and good afternoon to your viewers. Honestly speaking, I'm not necessarily shocked by these pronouncements by General Mkhwanazi. Coincidentally, a couple of months ago, I wrote about the concerns of disbanding this task team on the eve of the local government election. Of course, you would know that I'm not privy to any information from the police officers or from the security cluster for that matter. I was just looking at this issue from a distance, saying that if you analyze the situation from a distance, it doesn't make sense why you would close the task team when you know that political killings rise on the eve of an election. That is what I had in mind. And then now you have Mkhwanazi providing us more information to the effect. Of course, it depends on how you define an allegation. Some will define an allegation as a fact that has not been proven yet. Others will define an allegation as something that has not been tested in law. However you define it, the problem here is that we have a police force which is part of the security cluster that is not singing in unison. And that is a recipe for disaster for the safety of the country. So the issues that you raised are issues that are concerning, more especially because there are individuals who are mentioned who are not necessarily in the police force, the likes of Mkhwanazi, the likes of Kat. So basically, these are the people who are not necessarily in the police force, but then they seem to be more visible than the police officers. The question is why. And then lastly, this also tarnishes the image of the police minister, that is Senzo Mtolo. Of course, these allegations are yet to be tested, but the fact that you have Mkhwanazi reading from access from either WhatsApp messages or any other documents means that there is something to it that we cannot ignore. But then, of course, we wait and hear what the other side is saying on the issue. But yes, indeed, these issues are concerned.
Yeah. Prof. Mkhwanazi, I'll ask you to hold on for a moment. I want to bring in Chad Thomas in a moment, but just reflecting on some of what you were saying about some of the individuals that have been named. There's this Vusumuzi Ket Matlala that was mentioned in that briefing by the Police Commissioner of KwaZulu-Natal, talking about communications that were retrieved from a device that was seized by the police, and talking about WhatsApp messages, and one of them saying, and I quote here, it says, according to General Mkhwanazi, Lieutenant General Mkhwanazi, it was sent on the 1st of January this year. Brown Mkhotsi sending that WhatsApp to Vusi Ket Matlala and saying, quote unquote, the task team that came to your house and harassed you have been dissolved. They got the letter on Monday. As we speak, they are bringing all dockets to Sibia. So that's part of that, what Prof. Mkhwanazi is alluding to there. Chad Thomas, let me bring you into this. You follow what happens within crime fighting, policing quite closely. And just recently we were talking about the arrest of Dumisani Khumalo, the head of crime intelligence, and that seemed to be the focus of the story. Only for this afternoon for us to hear that there's a lot more going on behind the scenes, and these concerns are being brought to the fore by the police commissioner in KwaZulu-Natal. Are you able to make heads or tails of everything that we've heard this afternoon?
Good afternoon to you and the viewers, as well as the other members of this panel. Look, this is a reckoning that has needed to happen within the South African police services. We've been speaking for years and years and years about the different issues within the policing structures, yet nobody has stood up behind a podium and actually called out certain things the way in which Mkhwanazi did today. The story around Vusi Ket Matlala is exceptionally interesting. He's a rogue. He's been known to be involved in the underworld for many years now, running a crew called Boko Haram out of Mamelodi, being involved in all kinds of different crimes. When he was awarded the police wellness tender in June of last year, it came as a complete and utter shock to everybody that somebody with his background could be awarded such an important contract. The people that have been investigating murder for hire in Gauteng, a dedicated small team of crime intelligence members protected by the Special Task Force, have been able to, through their arrests, link so many people to this conspiracy, including Vusi Ket Matlala and other senior members. And credit must be given to those members because they've uncovered linkages to very senior members, in fact, their very own bosses within crime intelligence. So it just shows that within our police ranks, there are still members committed to serving and understanding what it means to wear that badge. I think Mkhwanazi has done us a good turn. Whether what he says turns out to be correct, somewhat correct or incorrect, at this point is irrelevant. He started the conversation. He's brought this war directly to the people. You can see by the way he speaks, you can see by the way he's dressed, that this is a war that he's brought directly to them. And he's saying we need to fight for the very fiber of the police force.
Yeah.
We hope that his intentions are good. And we hope that this is the reckoning we as the citizens of this country have been waiting for so many years.
Yeah. Chad, before I go to Ongama Mtimka, who has now joined this conversation, let me just take the point a bit further with you around what we heard this afternoon, well, earlier on in the day, from Lieutenant General Mkhwanazi, a number of names being mentioned. And you just wonder what the response and the pushback will be. And I do suspect, and Mzwandile Mbeche and I have been talking to some length about a kind of restructuring, repositioning, rearrangement of the decks within SAPS, that we may see narratives that may seem to suggest that all of this may be linked to this, not forgetting that Mkhwanazi himself was not until, just not long ago mentioned in connection with some irregularity or another relating to a senior correctional services official. Could there be more at play? Things to do with the imminent, the now vacant position of head of the Hawks and any other rearranging of the decks as far as the structures of the SAPS go?
Oh, most definitely, that's a certainty. Remember, when Mkhwanazi was head, or acting head rather, of the South African Police Services when he was appointed back in 2012. He was the first to, at that point, suspend General Mkhwanazi from crime intelligence, who had been involved in a whole array of serious crimes, for which he's been found guilty on some, and in others he's still on trial for. So Mkhwanazi is coming forward as somebody who has a history of not being shy to take on those that he believes may have corrupted the service at any point. Yes, that story that came out with him and the so-called correctional services official and the narcotics, it may have been disinformation. It may need to be investigated further. But it just shows what's happening in the background and how people are being used to spin, and how even in the private sector, there are certain bad actors that are being used to prop up those that are within the state law enforcement to keep those positions, to be able to perhaps enable and even embolden certain criminals in South Africa.
All right, let me bring in Ongama Mtimka. I do also have Ngabayomzi Kwankwa from the UDM Deputy President. But before I get to him, Ongama, let me give you an opportunity at this point. From everything we've heard, it's a story with many moving pieces. And I can tell you now, not many of us would have followed these allegations to the levels at which we've had to quickly catch up in the last 2 hours or so. Having heard that whirlwind of allegations that came through earlier on, what's your overall sense? What's at play here?
Tulas, the matters about which the general spoke were infuriating, in the sense that he's talking about how measures to deal with high-level crime, and I dare say national security issues, are being frustrated allegedly by those higher up and acting with people that are acting in bad faith. Further than that, the idea that there's been delays in appointments which directly link to this attempt to, capture law enforcement agencies. If the president is not infuriated by this so as to act immediately, because there's a lot of prima facie, things that the general pointed to that warrant summary dismissal of the minister and people who are involved, allegedly, he would not be taking South Africans seriously. In fact, I think he would be treating South Africans with contempt. What we are seeing here is a deep level of national security threat, internal national security threat, which needs to be acted on immediately. I think I note to us that the general is taking this action, and I say it is well advised, because I think that he's probably feeling a counter attack or a preemptive strike against him. Yeah. And he didn't even leave it for us to interpret. He said it himself, that the reason why he had always been on the combative arm of the police service has always been his dislike for criminals and his desire to deal with criminals head on. So I think even this media briefing was meant to take the war to the political network and its organized criminal syndicate that is apparently scalping policing efforts in the country.
Yeah, just hang on there, Ongama. I'll come back to you in a short while. But I want to bring in Ngabayomzi Kwankwa, the Deputy President of the United Democratic Movement, the UDM. Good afternoon. Thank you for your time. What's your understanding of what's at play here? Why would a police officer at that level, a provincial commissioner who, as I say, is riding the tide, at least of public popularity, at least, but has a lot to lose, and we all understand that he he understands, command and control, the lines of accountability. Why would he take such an extraordinary step that clearly is being criticized in some quarters for not following the proper channels? What do you believe is really at play that emboldened him and made him think that this is the step to take, whatever the consequences?
Obviously, there are issues of power dynamics. Thank you very much for having us. I'm sure there are internal struggles about what to do, the frustration that Dr. Mtimka is referring to. Perhaps they are really trying to do their job at that level with the different task teams that have been put in place. When you look at the amount of work they were trying to do and the investigations that they've done, the number of cases that they were dealing with, some which did not have progress, it could be a genuine attempt, a genuine call for how to say part of the problem, the reason why SABC is ineffective in fighting crime, especially violent crime in the country, and especially when it comes to dealing with syndicates that use sophisticated means, that have criminal networks that even go into government, for instance, is that they would then need outside help, especially from government, to be able to deal with that. But it is clear from where you're sitting that they are not singing from the same hymn book at the top echelons of South Africa, SABC police. Because if you look at it, this thing implicates the minister. There are some officials within government that seem to be implicated in this, and they've been facilitating the work of some of these criminal syndicates and so on. Now, when it goes as high as the minister, and probably you are trying to do the whistleblowing internally, and you are not being you are not receiving attention or paid attention to, you'd use other means to try and get your message out there. Often what happens is that when crime continues to escalate in the country, despite the efforts of some of the committed policemen and women in the country, they are scapegoated for those failures without us understanding the internal power dynamics and the frustrations that they go through on a daily basis. So it's clear. They are not. They don't see eye to eye internally in SABC.
Before I bring back Professor Mkhwanazi, let me stick with you, Ngabayomzi. What should be the immediate reaction, a reaction and response from those mentioned and implicated, the Minister of Police, as well as the President, to this news?
Firstly, from our view as a party, we believe that the President should actually act swiftly and conduct some preliminary investigation, which would actually give him all the facts he requires to be able to take some decision about this issue. Whether he wants to do further investigation, a proper inquiry, that will be determined by that preliminary investigation. But if I were the Minister of Police, I would actually step aside. If he believes in his innocence, if he believes the allegations are nonsense, step aside, allow the process to unfold, allow those preliminary investigations to take place so that he doesn't end up having to force the President's hand to remove it. But ultimately, when you consider how weighty these allegations are, the President will have to take a difficult decision of removing the minister and investigating and trying to find out what is happening. You can't have a situation where you look into these allegations while the minister is still there. Obviously, you would probably be able to frustrate the process and undermine the investigation. So the President has to act at some point, and Parliament, in fact, the Portfolio Committee on SABC has to summon SABC and get them to come and explain these allegations, including Provincial Commissioner Mkhwanazi on this issue, so that Parliament as well is able to set up its own investigative processes following the Portfolio Committee in Parliament, because we're an independent arm of government. Nothing stops us from actually conducting our own investigation to make an informed view about what's happening and where the weaknesses are and how that could be addressed in the medium to long term.
Stand by, don't go anywhere. Ngabayomzi, we'll come back to you in a moment. Let me just recap, in case you're just joining us. You're watching SABC News. This is the week ahead on SABC News. The reason you are seeing us doing things rather differently from how we normally do things on a Sunday afternoon is the extraordinary turn of events, I call it. Over 2.5 hours ago, at about 11 a.m., the Provincial Commissioner of Police in KwaZulu-Natal, Lieutenant General Mkhwanazi, hosting a media briefing, in which briefing he made serious allegations. And they hit you like a volley, these allegations. I was trying to take notes, Mzwandi Lembeche, joining me in studio. I couldn't keep up in terms of what I was hearing. Let me just read one of the allegations. Among the people that are being mentioned by Lieutenant General Mkhwanazi is one Vusumuzi Ket Matlala. And among some of what was said about him in particular, and I'm reading from the Mkhwanazi's statement here. He says, further analysis of the chats indicates that Vusumuzi Ket Matlala is financially supporting the Minister of Police and Mr. Brown Mokgotzi's political endeavors. This is supported by the evidence of conversations and the proof of payments of guests for the January 8th traveling costs and a gala dinner table in Cape Town. And therefore, in that, he includes a screenshot of the notification proof of payment for that gala dinner. Is it what? 11,000 Rand, I think it is. Yes. No, 111,000 Rand is that proof of payment. So that's part of what we've heard. I'll come back to you in a moment, Mzwai, but let me hear from Professor Beim Ngomezulu. Prof, again, I was saying earlier on, this sounds like allegations we've heard before. Didn't we hear all of this around forces outside of government, business networks, supporting political activities, January 8, transportation costs and the likes?
You know what Prof says? There is something very interesting here. When President Ramaphosa ascended to the presidency, he talked about the new dawn. Maybe at Ngwavuma, where I come from, we have a different definition of a new dawn, because what we have seen is the direct opposite of what we expected. We thought things were going to change for the better, but seemingly we are sinking further down in the pit hole. I don't know if we'll get out of this anytime soon. The reality here is that we are talking about what we refer to as allegations, as I said earlier on, depending on how we define it. But most of what General Mkhwanazi was saying is out there in the public domain. For example, the question you can ask is, was there any parliamentary portfolio committee? The answer is an emphatic yes. Did General Mkhwanazi address that portfolio committee? The answer is definitely yes. Were there questions directed at the Minister Senzo Mchunu? The answer is yes. So did he know about votes Ket Matala, or did he not know? Did he know anything about Brown and Mkhwanazi, or did he not know? So from what he's saying, of course we'll say it's allegations for now, but the reality is that there are facts out there. So which means then that we should not take these statements lightly, more especially given the fact that we are talking about a security cluster where our safety can be compromised if we don't take any action. Unfortunately, the president is in a compromised position, because ordinarily you would expect the president, when he comes back from Brazil, to take immediate action. Yeah. But why he's in a compromised position is that he himself was in the hot seat where during the Parliament, and then he did the most honorable thing, and I admire him for that. He wrote a resignation letter. But then that resignation letter never reached the speaker because the ANC used numbers to protect him. I asked a question at the time, at what cost to the organization and at what cost to the country? And I can always go back to those questions and demand answers from the nation and then from those involved. Then secondly, there's been a list of other ministers who have been implicated in wrongdoing, and the president did not act. Yeah. So now he's pressed between the rock and the hard place. Should he act against the current minister, Senzo Mchunu, or should he wait for an investigation? Yeah. Should the minister, Samara minister, step aside pending the investigation, or should he wait until he's formally charged and then step aside? What to make of other members of the ANC who were implicated in wrongdoing, appeared in court, but were still sworn in as members of parliament? So it's on those grounds that I'm saying that I feel sorry for the president, in fact, because even if he wants to act, the question is, why would he act now if he has not acted in the past? So those are the questions that the public will be asking.
Mzwai, let me give you a moment here before I go to Tebogo Khas of Public Interest South Africa, who's also now joined the conversation. How complicated, Prof. Ngomezulu alludes to it somewhat, how complicated does this make the picture for President Ramaphosa, especially in the context of the government of national unity? Even before he went to Brazil, there were already those ructions that seemed to escalate around the dismissal of Andrew Whitfield, and then the DA pointing out and saying that, well, you are dealing with a whole host of ministers who are either rogue or suspect at the very least. Add to that now the allegations being made to another minister that now he has to factor into the equation whatever response he may want to give.
I think as soon as the president comes back, obviously he would need clarity from those concerned. But even before he comes back, and I think people mentioned, particularly the minister in this instance, must be able to then come out on the public platform and explain some of what is being said about him. And then so we get to understand. Remember, right now, it's one side of Mkhwanazi.
Yes.
So let's get to hear the other side, and then we are able to then
but
decide
here's the difficult thing, Mzwa, if I can just jump in quickly.
Yeah.
The difficulty is we know how the processes work. President Ramaphosa is likely going to say, without trying to read his mind, write me a report, Minister Mkhunu, and tell me your side of the story. And that takes a while. And the sense of impatience grows that your processes take too long. Can he afford to follow the normal procedure that he followed with Thembis Melane, for example, that he followed with Andrew Whitfield, for example?
I think that's why, it's important as well from the side of the ministry to put its side so that we understand what exactly is happening. So once the president then embarks on those processes, as the public, we are better informed as to exactly, we understand why is the president doing this.
Yeah.
So I expect perhaps in the next day or two, the police ministry to be able to then put its side of the story, and then perhaps even the national commissioner to amplify some of these issues, because immediately Mkhwanazi had spoken, General Spear came and rubbished many of what Mkhwanazi
to
had
his
said.
credit.
So that is why it's important that we get to understand the full picture. Then we can say to the president, this is what's happening. What's your next move?
All right. Let me go to Ongama Mtimka. Ongama, just another take from your side. The process is unfolding to go forward. A consistent theme that I've heard this afternoon, and we've really had to clear the decks in terms of everything else that we had planned, and this is the only story that we have really covered this afternoon, and for a good reason. Among the themes that I've heard is a call for a parliamentary inquiry. That's certainly what came through from many political parties reacting. And then also we've been hearing talk about a process outside of Parliament itself, as I see Tebogo Khas also joining. But just talk to those elements, Ongama, the importance of getting to grips with a proper and thorough investigation inside and outside of Parliament.
Tula's leadership has got sometimes to act very boldly and in unusual ways. One, this is a matter of national security. So you're not dealing with a minister of education who's lied, or a minister in a deputy minister who takes a trip. These are allegations about people stymieing investigations of senior politicians or politicians who are representative of the people of South Africa, who have been killed. And the allegations are that people have acted in bad faith to stymie those. I don't know how we can talk about how there's a need for parliamentary investigations, this, that, and the other. No, this is a national security issue, and there's enough prima facie evidence. In fact, I wanted to come in when MP Kwang was talking to say, hopefully, if there's going to be such processes, you have precautionary suspensions immediately. I mean, you can't take something over which the life of a nation depends and subject it to mediocre processes that show no leadership whatsoever, or a significant recognition of the special and, in fact, exceptional circumstances under which we are. We are at a war, as it has been painted out. There are two sides here. There seems to be a side. In fact, I'm saying seems because it's very clear. I mean, General Mkhwanazi has had a history of fighting and passionately against crime in the country. And I think that sometimes we must take these principles of liberal democratic principles that we love so much. Sometimes they have to fall and be a subject to effective leadership of how you deal with the crisis.
Yeah. Ngabayonzi Kwankwa, let me bring you back into this conversation. Talk to me about the call for a parliamentary inquiry. I imagine that is meant to be more systemic and sort of fix and bring in a fix that's more long-term and more sustainable. But are there actions that should happen in the immediate, and especially in the context of the varying views within the government of national unity that we saw recently when Andrew Whitfield was dismissed from the executive, as well as the reaction of the Democratic Alliance, which you were not aligned with. Does this change your mind within the government of national unity about whether this needs to be approached differently in the manner that Ongama Mtimka is suggesting?
It's quite correct. These are very weighty allegations. You can't wait for long investigations to take place when you're dealing with issues of national security. That's why I said we're hoping or calling on the minister to do us a favor. He can brief us fine, but step aside and allow due process to follow the investigation to unfold. If he doesn't do that, the president will have to act, probably giving a precautionary suspension so that the investigation can be able to unfold. I mean, the parliamentary process is likely to be very long. As you said, it can be a multifaceted approach where the president would do a preliminary investigation to test the veracity of these allegations. I mean, General Mkhwanazi also has the evidence, they've done their investigation, they know what they're talking about. So that process can't really take long to check the allegations. But the parliamentary process would be to, precisely what you said, address the systemic issues that allowed this process to unfold, allowed the frustration, the undermining of certain institutions that were trying to investigate, both the political interference. So that process might take long. And I do not even think that such a process would be adequately addressed in a portfolio committee per se. We've always done well when we would have ad hoc committees that would deal with inquiries and look at issues from a multifaceted point of view. That's what we require. But the president has to act immediately. Yeah. Because failure to do so then creates this uncertainty in the question of SABS and undermines national security, and we can't allow that to happen. And when you deal with other genuine issues, it's about whether a person went on a trip. It's not a real security issue, but it's an issue about authority and accountability within the JN itself. This is a different matter altogether. Yeah. It requires the president to act almost immediately.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we can hear from Mkhwanazi at this particular point. We were just trying to align one or two issues with him. We'll come back to him in a moment. Chad Thomas, let me bring you back into the conversation. The point has been made, and analysis and I suppose critique has been made that there's a tendency in South Africa to want people to be wholly good or wholly bad, demons and angels kind of narrative. Part of what I noticed in this story is that it involves now Lieutenant General Mkhwanazi, who has enjoyed a fair amount of public support, but also now Shadrack Sibiya, someone that over the last few years, the narrative was that he certainly was a bulwark against some of the capture and corruption of processes within the police. Help us make sense of it. How tricky does this make the picture that you sit here with someone that many people have had faith in now being accused in the manner that is happening at the moment?
Yeah, it's a very difficult position that we as a country find ourselves in, especially those of us that are involved in law enforcement as well as journalists. We tend to look to people in leadership as being appointed based on merit, based on the fact that they're in that position because they were vocationally aligned and inclined to wanting to make a difference, especially in South Africa where we have this massive war on crime, where crime has seemed to have the upper hand the last couple of years. For myself, when Senzo Mkhunu became minister, I thought it was a breath of fresh air. He seemed to come across as very victim-centric. He even called for the very first anti-crime summit, bringing together all the role players. So I hope that a lot of what's been said today can be explained. But one thing that needs to be made very clear is that the police are at war with itself. And like you mentioned, you spoke about you can either be an angel or you can be a demon. Within crime intelligence, it's neither. It's a gray area in which they walk. They have to be aligned to the police, but at the same time, they have to infiltrate crime syndicates, and it opens up the door for people to be compromised. And it's time that this reckoning took place. We as the people of South Africa deserve accountability and transparency from our police leaders. And I just hope that the president does make the right decisions going forward, and that what happened today opens the doors to thorough discussion and cleansing of a department that seems to be broken at this point in time.
Let me go to Professor Beim Ngomezulu. Prof, in terms of how this is dealt with organizationally within the SAPS, how difficult will it be? We know we're dealing with a provincial commissioner who, as I say, I don't have a poll to pull up and show you the numbers, but you can get a sense of the kind of popularity that he enjoys. To the extent that there are issues of protocols, policing organization protocols that he may be suspected of having breached, how difficult would it be to raise that issue? Or will the focus now solely be on, we get that he didn't follow the protocol, but the bigger issue are the allegations that he's brought forward in that unorthodox manner?
That's a very critical question, If someone were to be killed, and then you saw that person being killed, the question then would be, do you first report the matter to the police before you tell the family? That is something that will be debatable. In this case, there are quite a number of statements that General Mkhwanazi made, and they are concerning, as my other panelists have been saying, they are concerning because they talk to the security of the country, and therefore urgent action needs to be taken. Then if there are any internal processes within SABS that need to be followed, then let those processes be followed. We can have parallel processes because they are given the agents of the matter. In fact, when Mkhwanazi was talking, I was asking myself the question, if indeed, if it were to be found to be correct that Minister Mtono denied knowing someone when he actually knew him, would it be because he did that deliberately, or would it be because they brought in someone who has no background in policing? And then if the latter is the case, then it means that the point that some of us have been making in the past, that you must use meritocracy when you appoint people into positions of power, more especially in critical departments like this one. Yeah. Because then if, say, Senzo Mtono acted out of ignorance of how the police cluster operates, you would not blame him as an individual because he didn't appoint himself. They would be asking the president what informed the president to appoint him in that position in the first place. I asked a similar question when the president appointed Enje Mutferha to be the minister of defense and then making General Omisa a head deputy. I asked the question, was there any reasoning behind that? I even went on to say that if I had it my way, I would have not appointed General Omisa to deputize Enje Mutferha with no idea.
All right.
3 minutes later, she came back, she said she would not be wearing boots. So that is the situation happens to me.
All right, let's leave it there with you this afternoon. That's Professor Beim Ngomezulu. And at this point, we can also release Ngabayomzi Kwankwa, the Deputy President of the United Democratic Movement. We still have the other panelists also joining us, Ongama Mtimka, political analyst, and we're trying to line up the audio issues with Tebogo Khas from Public Interest South Africa, also lining up more political reaction for you, as well as Mzondi Lembeche in studio.